This is my mother, World War II veteran, 2nd Lieutenant Beverly Wagoner, Army Nurse Corps. She was born in 1923, grew up during the Depression, living on a rural farm in Rush County, Indiana. Her father, Chester Meal, was a veteran of World War I. She writes, "Those of us of a certain age will remember where we were and what we were doing on December 7th, 1941. I was in nursing school at the Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis. The student nurses lived in Wiley Hall in the 800 block of Capitol Avenue, and we were all shocked, horrified, and scared when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. My brother Stanley joined the Air Corps a few weeks later. My brother Harlan would enter the Navy ROTC program at Harvard and would become a Navy pilot. When I graduated from nursing school in 1944, I tried to enlist in the Navy, but I was told I needed to have my tonsils removed. So I applied to the Army Nurse Corps, and they accepted my application. On April 1st, I entered into active service at Billings General Hospital at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis. I remember telling my mother and father that I wanted to enlist, and they did not object. How they must have felt to have 3 of their 6 children in that war. We started working on the wards of the hospital immediately, and just as immediately I fell in love with the wonderful young men that I cared for on those wards. At the same time, we new enlistees were involved with basic training. We learned how to march, to salute, how to wear the uniform, and we were yelled at and badgered by our drill sergeant as much as any other new soldiers. We were taught how to put on a gas mask. We were told how important it was to put on our masks at the first sign of gas. Our sergeant told us we would be shown how troops maneuver under smoke screens and marched us into the smoke, and it did not take long until we realized that tear gas was mixed in with the smoke and we were scrambling to get our masks on. After basic training, I was sent to Newton B. Baker General Hospital at Martinsburg, West Virginia. It had 1,800 beds. There I was a general duty nurse. My record says I served as supervisor of 3 80-bed wards, supervised 4 medical corpsmen, had charge of all admission to hospital and screened these men, had charge of the allergy clinic, and served as the general duty nurse on plastic, hand, orthopedic, and medical wards. I served as head nurse on the general surgical ward and supervised nurses, cadet nurses, wax, and medical corpsmen. Here's a short clip of my mother being very humble about the impressive job that she did.
Now, you were in the Army.
Yes.
What was your rank?
I was a 2nd lieutenant.
And you went in on
No, April 1st.
April 1st, April
Yeah,
Fool's Day.
April Fool's Day.
Yep.
And was discharged on July 4th.
And I want to read something out of your book to you. Lieutenant Meal had substantial supervisory responsibility as an Army nurse. We would like to know how you found your way to those responsibilities and how it was to exercise them and how it made a difference later. Being a supervisor, a boss.
I really wasn't a good supervisor. And I once applied to be a job to be a director of nurses, and I didn't get it, and I wouldn't have been good at it, I don't believe. But that's what the reason I got the job was because I was an officer, and the people who worked for me were crewmen, medical crewmen, and of course the doctors who cared for the boy.
We received patients from overseas hospitals, kept those with us when we had services to help, and sent others to more appropriate hospitals. We tried to get the patients close to their homes. When the patients arrived, the ambulatory ones wore pajamas and bathrobes and usually wore boots. I became an expert. I could identify the branch of service by their boots. Infantry boots were very different from artillery boots, and most different from other boots were those worn by the paratroopers. These are two of the medical corpsmen I worked with. I was late in the war, and the Army put men wherever they were needed. One of these men had been a baker, and one had been a mechanic. The medics who served overseas became as expert as nurses and doctors. They learned by doing. Soldiers were always thrilled to be able to make a call home, and there was always need for another deck of cards. No story about my days in the Army would be complete without introducing Captain Isabella Brooks. She had been in the Army for several years, had worked in the Indian Service, and she was a private duty nurse for the wife of General George Marshall. And she was my close friend. Following the duty, she was transferred to Newton D. Baker, and we lived in big dormitories, and she heard me singing. She liked it and introduced herself to me. We spent a great deal of time together. This is a letter that my mother received from President Harry Truman when she was discharged. It reads, "To you who answered the call of your country and served in its armed forces to bring about the total defeat of the enemy, I extend the heartfelt thanks of a grateful nation. As one of the nation's finest, you undertook the most severe task one can be called upon to perform, because you demonstrated the fortitude, resourcefulness, and calm judgment necessary to carry out that task. We now look to you for leadership and example in further exalting our country in peace." More than 59,000 American nurses served in the Army Nurse Corps during World War II. Nurses worked closer to the front lines than they ever had before. Within the chain of evacuation established by the Army Medical Department during the war, nurses served under fire in field hospitals and evacuation hospitals, on hospital trains and hospital ships. As flight nurses on medical transport planes, the skill and dedication of these nurses contributed to the extremely low post-injury mortality rate among American military forces in every theater of the war. Overall, fewer than 4% of the American soldiers who received medical care in the field or underwent evacuation died from wounds or disease. Truly, this was the greatest generation.